Usually, a ZX Spectrum game, however good, is a game of its time. Not necessarily just because of the colours or speed or general technical prowess, but because they feature a style of gaming that, even if it's still good, isn't something you see much nowadays. They don't really make platformers like Manic Miner anymore, they don't make adventures like Head Over Heels, and even arcade games are usually more complex than something like Jetpack. It's rarer, but also joyous, to find a game from that time that in many ways does feel like something modern, that you could actually imagine playing now. And while you'll find a lot of excellent modern homebrew that fits the bill, when it's a game from back in the day, well, that's a serious gem indeed. And today we're covering such a game, Rex from 1988. You could put this in all sorts of categories: platformer, shoot 'em up, adventure. You could even consider it a sort of Metroidvania. It's very different to many other games of its time, and it's very much worth a detailed look. You play as the titular Rex, this hulking rhino-esque mercenary, and you have a job to do. Humans have expanded outside of Earth and are now ruining various other planets in the galaxy, including a previously pretty one called Zenith. There's a load of humans there that you have to kill who have made a base at a place called the Great Tower and are sucking out all the energy from the planet. It's your mission to destroy it, and you'll do so using what the inlay calls the greatest weapon system yet seen, capable of tearing enemies asunder in a mass of sound and colour. The game itself runs on all spectrums above 48K and including 48K, and actually consists of a couple of different full loads. There's two parts to the game, both of which have to be loaded from scratch, and there's also a roll-in demo that shows the beginning of Rex's mission and also functions as a tutorial. That in itself is something different. It's very rare for a Spectrum game to feature any kind of tutorial at all, let alone one that's more than a screen telling you what the keys do. That should clue you in on this game being a little bit more complex than most. How did the game come about? Well, that's a bit of an odd one in a few ways. Rex is credited to a team called The Light, consisting of John Anderson, Neil Harris and Richard Allen. However, if you look these people up, you won't find any credit for them aside from Rex. Was this a one-hit wonder? A trio that came together, created one superb game, then just vanished? Well, no, they don't actually exist. The real team of developers behind Rex is called Creative Reality. John Anderson is Jason Austin, Neil Harris is Neil Dodwell, and Richard Allen is David Dew. So what's the story behind the name change? For this we go to the pages of Retro Gamer, and a very nice feature all about Rex's creation, penned by the awesome Graham Mason. Creative Reality were largely partnered up with publishers Martech, and they'd already had a couple of games that pushed the Speccy a bit, games like 1986's Tarzan and WAR. They also made a couple of games based on 2000 AD licenses. 1987's Nemesis the Warlock is a good one, and there's also Slain, which is, well, one of the strangest Speccy games I can think of, a sort of action and text adventure hybrid. All was good, but then Creative Reality did drop a bit of a clanner with 1988's The Fury, a post-apocalyptic driving game. It looks good, but the game flopped, and to be honest it isn't a particularly good game at all. After The Fury got such a poor reception, Creative Reality were pretty well convinced that Martech were about to drop them. The only thing they had in their pocket was an early demo for something that was then called the Peeps game, which would evolve into Rex. It didn't consist of much except a character jumping around and shooting a stickman, but Martech were happy with it, and so the demo saved their bacon. Creative Reality then decided, just for this game, to adopt a new identity in order to disassociate themselves from their recent flop. A bit of an extreme thing to do perhaps, but they weren't taking any chances. And that's how we end up with the Light's one and only game, the almighty Rex, which was at one stage called Zenith, but because there was a window company named Zenith Windows, they decided against that. Anyway, it's about time to get deep into it and see just how this game's one that not only triumphed back then, but still really shines today. I mean, it starts well enough with one of the Speccy's most memorable loading screens, but the play is something else. What can our hero do? Well, he can fire and jump around, for a start. He also has several important systems at his disposal. Obviously he's got his weapon, and we'll get there, But the shield is even more important. The shield is a bubble that's triggered by pressing down, and with it, Rex is immune to shots. If he's hit without the shield, he's toast. You can move around with the shield just fine, but naturally it has a limited lifespan, one that can be depleted even faster if shots and enemies hit it. However, you can recharge the shield at various pods that are dotted around the place. Then, of course, you have Rex's gun. His dispenser of agony comes in 5 different flavours, starting with a regular machine gun, upgrading to a twin shot, a laser that goes through enemies, a circle of drones that fires lots of shots forward, and then a multi-directional projectile launcher that has a couple more modes, a 3-way spray, a 4-way spray, and lastly an 8-way spray that basically murders anything on the screen. You collect most of these weapons in the beginning, but you can't use them until you upgrade your power, and you collect that from dead enemies. One other cool thing is that with some weapons, you can juggle regular enemies just by shooting them repeatedly. Doing so gives you a points bonus, which you can see on the top of the display. And lastly, you do also have a couple of smart bombs that you can use if you're in a pinch. All told, that's a lot of different tools at your disposal, especially for a Spectrum game. The first thing that may well strike you is the quality of the graphics. For the 48K Spectrum, they are absolutely amazing. So bright and colourful, and so many different sprites to look at, including a couple of large bosses. And there's not an ounce of the old colour clash to be found anywhere. By 1988, when this game was released, having colour clash in Spectrum games was seen as a big no-no, so it had to be avoided. As we've seen in other vids, like the various ones about arcade ports to the Spectrum, one of the more common ways around that was simply to make the game monochrome. But Rex manages to deploy an awful lot of colour, mainly in the background layer, while keeping most of the sprites white save for explosions and what have you. It's all nice and clever, and in Retro Gamer, Jason Austin cited the excellent Dan Dare Pilot of the Future, another game we've looked at, as being a big inspiration behind Creative Reality's approach to Rex's graphics. Indeed, the second part of the game, the Zenith Tower, is very much like Dan Dare in terms of graphics and the hefty use of blue. Technical excellence aside, Rex is simply a triumph just from the artistic point of view. There's so many memorable surroundings, enemies and what have you, and so many things that really stick in the mind when compared to other Speccy games, that for me it has to go down as one of the best looking games on the system, certainly from its commercial period. Another thing that helps here, of course, is the amount of action. Rex is most certainly not an empty game. In fact, it'll throw an absolute ton of enemies and projectiles at you. The game is very tough, and you've got to move around very carefully. Deploying your shield is an absolute must. Without it, you will be killed in short order, so you've got to make sure there's always some shield in reserve. It's generally quite fair when it comes to difficulty, even if it can be frustrating at points. There are thankfully an awful lot of checkpoints in the game, which is another touch that makes the game feel more modern. It does all this while also keeping the game running at a smooth pace. It's not a fast game, but it moves nicely. Some critics did knock the game a bit at the time for being small and not having a lot of big sprites, but in all honesty the style of Rex nowadays has held up a lot better than other games with big sprites like, say, Trantor the Last Stormtrooper, and the gameplay here is undoubtedly far superior. Still, yeah, it's going to give you a tough time. You've got to keep moving as well. It may feel like you've got to spend a little while planning a route and what have you, but you will be killed if you dawdle in a screen for a bit too long, and naturally you only have a few lives and no continues to play with. If you're playing on an emulator, you may well want to make liberal use of save states, especially as the game gets into its second half, where the enemies just get nastier and the environment gets even more hostile, with plenty of plants and growths that'll kill you on contact. What other unique things can you find in Rex then? Well, there's some different paths and secrets dotted around. It might be a bit of a stretch to call a game a Metroidvania, as it is generally quite linear, but there are some alternative routes, and the act of finding the different weapons and gradually upgrading Rex to make him even more of a killing machine does make the game something of a distant cousin. There's the opportunity to power up or power down. You find these items dotted around and they'll give you a slot machine of sorts that you have to stop. Sometimes it'll help you, sometimes it'll hinder you. Again, not something you usually see in games on this computer. And of course, there's the whole second part. At the end of the first part, you get a code that you have to write down. Having done that, you reset the computer, load up side B, and then input the code to continue the game in the Zenith Tower with everything that you've found previously. The only thing that the game doesn't really have is that much of an ending. The final boss is a memorable sight, but it doesn't actually do a lot and dies in a few shots, at which point you get a simple message. With the big squidgy thing destroyed, Rex can go home and have a nice cup of tea and put his feet up. As is often the case with Speccy games, this final sequence was done right at the very end of the game's 4-month development cycle, and there wasn't much time to put an awful lot more in. This is one of the few regrets that the Creative Reality team had when it came to Rex, wishing that the final screen of the game had a bit more challenge to it. That said, there's more than enough challenge in the rest of the game to make up for it. Generally speaking, Rex got the reaction that it deserved. It was a great critical success, getting high scores from Crash, Your Sinclair and Sinclair User, with any of the aforementioned little criticisms that reviewers had largely cast aside in favour of the game's exceptional play. It really doesn't feel like a Spectrum game from 1988. It's one that's more than stood the test of time, and it's still quite mind-boggling to think that you can play it on the 48K Speccy, a machine that was already 6 years old by the time that this game came out. Even when you look at the games that were amongst the greatest technical achievements of the system's early years, the games by Ultimate and what have you, comparing those to something like Rex shows how far people were able to push the exact same hardware. While it is certainly a difficult time, it's not even one that falls too far into the trap of being hideously unfair that a lot of old Spectrum games tend to fall in. Jason Austin mentions in the Retro Gamer article that back in these days there weren't really such things as focus groups or dedicated playtesters, and that was a big reason why a lot of Spectrum games tended to be so tough, because testing was purely the job of the dev team who were intimately familiar with the title. But even with that in mind, Rex remains a challenging but not wholly irritating experience. It's a classic Spectrum game for sure, but a classic that feels different from so many of its contemporaries, the sort of game that's a real showcase for both the underrated prowess and the importance of the computer. It's worth taking a little bit of time here at the end to look at the various other things that Creative Reality and its members got up to. The team didn't work on another 8-bit game together, but you can find them on a couple of other projects after Rex. Jason Austin did the Speccy version of Altered Beast, for example, which, yes, doesn't play particularly well, although it certainly does look and sound very good. Neil Dodwell and David Dew would move on from Rex to another great game. They handled the Spectrum version of System 3's Myth History in the Making. This is another one of the system's great showcases. It ended up being the best version of the game, even in the eyes of a dedicated C64 head like System 3's boss, Mark Cale, and it's a highly playable action-adventure platformer that once again shows off all the best things about the Speccy. Creative Reality would go into a different and thoroughly more violent direction in the 16-bit era. They were behind 1994's Dreamweb, a rather controversial and brutal cyberpunk adventure, before releasing their final game, Martian Gothic Unification, in 2000. Austin, Dodwell and Dew have all had lengthy industry careers, with credits on a whole assortment of games. But when they say that Rex is one of, if not the best thing that they ever worked on, certainly back in the 8-bit years, well, it's pretty tough to disagree. As tough as a vicious rhino-sapien with a massive gun juggling your corpse for a laugh. Bye for now.